What if I told you the band that influenced Iron Maiden, Metallica, and Def Leppard was sabotaged from the inside by their own guitar hero? He was a teenage prodigy who disappeared mid-tour, refused to play their biggest songs, and held their success hostage to his own demons. Totally beyond rock and roll chaos, it was a meltdown that cost them everything. Here's how UFO's greatest weapon became their own career killer.
Like, subscribe. Thank you.
Let's get one thing straight. Before Post-Schenker, UFO was just another band. A decent one, certainly. They're a London-based crew with a space rock vibe, churning out albums that made a little noise, but never really shook the foundation. Phil Mogg had the voice, a gruff, street-tough delivery that felt real. Pete Way had the look and the stage presence, and he was a wild man bassist who lived the rock and roll life probably harder than anybody. Andy Parker was a solid, reliable drummer. They had something. Kind of working class grit, but they were missing that fire. They were a car with a solid engine but no supercharger. They needed something explosive, something that would make people actually stop and listen. And in Germany, they found it in the form of a quiet, skinny teenager who couldn't string together a sentence in English but could make his Gibson Flying V sing, scream, and cry. The year was 1973. UFO was touring Germany, and their current guitarist, Bernie Marsden, had a passport issue. Stranded, they needed a fill-in, and fast. They were booked to open for a German band called Scorpions. During the sound check, this 18-year-old kid from the opening act started playing. The members of UFO just stood there, with their jaws on the floor. The kid was Post-Schenker. He was already a prodigy, fingers flying across the fretboard with this precision and melody that seemed impossible for his age. Pete Way? Well, he knew immediately. This was the guy. This was that rocket fuel that they actually needed. Somehow, they convinced him to join. Here he is, he barely spoke their language, was painfully shy. They had no idea what the hell he was getting into, but he packed his bags and moved to England. UFO had just unknowingly hired its greatest asset and its eventual saboteur. The change was immediate. The first album with Schenker, Phenomenon, released in 1974, was a different beast entirely. The spacey jams were gone, replaced by this razor-sharp hard rock. And on that album were two songs that would define them forever, Dr. Doctor and Rock Bottom. The riff to Dr. Doctor is pure adrenaline, this galloping anthem that would become their signature opener. And then there was Rock Bottom, the song that was basically a showcase for their new weapon. The song itself is great, but that extended solo section is friggin' legendary. It's a masterpiece of structure, melody, pure all-out emotion. Schenker took it beyond shredding to where he was actually telling a story with the guitar. It was the sound of pure genius unleashed. And the next few years were a blur of creation. Force It in 75, No Heavy Petting in 76, Lights Out in 77. Each album was stronger and more confident. And Schenker's playing was the centerpiece. He had a tone that was instantly recognizable. Rich, melodic with that vocal-like vibrato. He could write a hook that was as catchy as any chorus, but he could also unleash this friggin' insane torrent of notes that would leave other guitar players going, what the hell just happened? And they were touring all over the place, building this massive following, especially in the UK and Japan. Songs like Lights Out, Too Hot to Handle, Love to Love, they weren't just album tracks, but they were just pure anthems as well. UFO was on the verge of breaking big, especially in the US, the market that could turn them from rock stars into rock gods. But the machine at the center of it all was starting to smoke and spark. Michael was not built for the rock and roll circus. He was an artist, deeply sensitive and introverted person thrown into a world of loud noises, constant travel, and a whole shitload of pressure. He struggled with the language, with the fame, and with the lifestyle. Started drinking heavily, mixing it with substances to cope, which only made his fragile mental state worse. The band would get ready to go on stage and Michael would be nowhere to be found. He'd just vanish, disappear for days, leaving them stranded. And he did it so often, the band had a nickname for it, a German holiday. He'd get overwhelmed and just flee, sometimes hopping on a plane back to Germany without telling anybody. In one famous instance, he disappeared mid-tour and popped up again playing with his old band Scorpions, letting that unmistakable guitar work to their classic album Love Drive before vanishing again and returning to UFO. And the band was basically held hostage. The most important member was also the most unreliable. They couldn't function without him, but they never knew if he was going to show up. And the breaking point, the moment that should have been their crowning achievement, was the live album. In 1978, the band recorded a series of shows in the US. They were at the absolute peak of their powers. The recordings were friggin' electric. The band's on fire, and Schenker was playing like a friggin' man possessed. And the result, the album Strangers in the Night, released in early '79, is almost universally considered one of the greatest live albums in the history of rock music. It captured that raw energy and melodic brilliance, sheer power of the band, in a way their studio albums never quite did. It was a perfect snapshot of a band about to conquer the world. This was it. This was their ticket to the big time. The album was climbing the charts in the UK and crucially in the US. They're finally breaking America. And that is when Michael Schenker quit. It was well beyond a quiet departure into just straight up implosion. The pressures of the impending American superstardom was just too much for him. He didn't want it. He didn't want to be the quote-unquote guitar hero everyone was telling him he was. He just wanted to play music on his own terms. And the tension that had been simmering for years finally boiled over. Accounts differ on the exact details, but it came down to a brutal physical fight between Phil Mogg and Michael Schenker. Mogg, the pragmatic frontman, the guy who had to cancel shows and apologize to promoters, finally just had enough of this shit. Schenker, feeling cornered and misunderstood, just lashed out. And so, of course, fist flew, and it was ugly. That was it. Right when Strangers in the Night was poised to make them household names, their genius guitar player walked away, leaving the band in ruins. It was the ultimate act of career sabotage, whether he meant it to be or not. He built the rocket, and just as it was about to clear the tower, he hit the self-destruct button. The band was devastated, but they were survivors. They recruited Paul Tonka Chapman, a capable guitarist who had filled in for Schenker during one of his German holidays before. Chapman was a great player, solid, bluesy, but he wasn't Michael Schenker. The albums that followed, like No Place to Run, and The Wild, The Willing, and The Innocent were good, and they were successful even. But that magic, that spark of unpredictable genius was gone. The question of what if hung over them like a ghost. They had been so friggin' close, they could taste it. And it had been snatched away, not by the industry, not by critics, but by the man standing to the right of the mic stand. Years went by. Schenker formed his own band, MSG, had his own share of success and turmoil. UFO carried on, but eventually the classic lineup's bassist, Pete Way, also succumbed to the rock and roll lifestyle, his struggles with addiction becoming a tragic story in his own right. But the allure of that classic UFO lineup was too strong to die completely. In the mid-90s, the impossible happened. They got back together. Mogg, Way, Parker, and Schenker, along with Paul Raymond. They recorded a new album, Walk on Water. And for a brief shining moment, it felt like they were back. The album was surprisingly strong, a modern update of that classic sound they had. They announced a tour, and fans were ecstatic. And then, it all fell apart again, in exactly the same way. The tour was a disaster. Schenker was as unpredictable as ever. The old demons came roaring back. One night he'd be brilliant. The next he'd be a total mess. The most infamous incident happened in Manchester. Right in the middle of a song, he just stopped playing, put his guitar down, and walked off stage, leaving the rest of the band to face a stunned and pissed off audience. And he just simply vanished. It happened again and again. Shows were canceled. The reunion, which had started with so much promise, crashed and burned in a spectacular flame-out, full of resentments and renewed chaos. They tried it again a few years later. The same thing happened. It was a toxic cycle. They were brilliant together, but they were poison for each other. Michael Schenker couldn't handle the structure and pressure of being in UFO. UFO could not handle the chaos of having Michael Schenker in the group. So eventually, Phil Mogg had to make a choice. He could either let the band die for good, or he'd just move on without the man who had defined its sound. And he chose to move on. So he brings in American shredder Vinnie Moore, phenomenal player with a completely different style, and kept the UFO name alive. They continued to tour and make records, building this whole new legacy for themselves. But for that golden era, from 73 to 79, UFO was a band with a bottle of lightning in their hands. They had a guitarist who could have rivaled anybody. Page, Beck, Blackmore, had the songs, the live show, and of course the momentum. But the same fire that made them brilliant was the fire that burned the whole damn thing down. They were sabotaged from within, not with malice, but with this tragic combination of genius and fragility that cost them a seat at the table of rock's absolute elite.